In this video, I want to show you the real process behind the 3 UIs. Not just the final result, but how I actually get there. We'll start with simple inspiration screenshot, recreate them inside Neuform, change the theme, polish the layout, fix the details, add animation, and how you can export the final HTML and DESIGN.md files. So you can see the full workflow from inspiration to finished UI. So let's get started. Before generating any UIs in Neuform, I like to start by finding a strong visual reference. This can be from different places depending on the kind of UI you want to create. You can use Dribble, which is great for more creative, polished, and sometimes experimental UI concept. You'll find a lot of beautiful hero section, app interfaces, landing page concept, and visual direction that are more design focused. You can also use Mobbin, which is better if you want inspiration from real products and real app screens. It's especially useful when you want to understand how actual companies structure onboarding flows, dashboards, pricing pages, or mobile interfaces. Another good option is SaaSpo, where you can find more practical SaaS landing page inspiration. This is useful when you want layouts that feel closer to real marketing websites instead of just visual concepts. But for this example, I'm using a site called OnSection. So OnSection is a curated website section library with over 2,000 website sections. You can browse by category like hero section, features, CTAs, footers, testimonials, and more. So for this first example, I'm going into the hero section category and just browsing until I find something that feels simple, clean, and has potential for a remix. So this one caught my attention because the layout is not too complicated. It has a nice structure. It gives us enough to work with without being too hard to recreate. So I'm just going to save the image into my downloads folder. Now back inside Neuform, there are two ways to start. You can drag the screenshot directly into the platform, or you can click the attachment icon and upload the image manually. From there, the prompt can be very simple, something like recreate this layout. The reason I'm keeping the prompt simple here is because at this stage, I don't want to redesign it yet. I want the AI to reproduce the original reference as closely as possible so I can use it as a foundation. Then I just click create. So this is the first iteration. At first glance, it doesn't look perfect because we have broken images, so it can feel like the layout failed, but this is not really a big problem. The images are being pulled from Unsplash, and broken images are usually easy to fix later. What matters more at this stage is the structure. And if we look past the broken images, the actual layout is pretty close to the original screenshot. So now we have a foundation we can work from. This part is important because not every first generation is worth saving. So my personal rule is simple. If the first version is around 70% close to the reference, I'll continue working on it. But if the layout is below that, I don't waste time trying to fix everything. I'll just generate a new version. Sometimes the next generation gives you a much stronger starting point. In this case, I'm satisfied with the first version, so I'm going to continue working on it. Now, the next step is optional, but this is how I personally like to work. There are two ways to edit an existing UI in Neuform. The first way is to keep prompting directly inside Neuform until you get something you like. And that can work really well if you only need one or two changes. But the downside is that every prompt creates another remix. So if you do a lot of small modification, you can quickly end up with too many versions and the project can start to feel messy. So if I need more control, I use this workflow. I combine Neuform with ChatGPT simply because I already have an active subscription. So instead of using all my prompts and credit inside Neuform for small edits, I use my existing subscription to plan the direction, generate better prompts, and sometimes modify the code directly. That way, I can save my Neuform credit for the moments where I actually want to create a new remix or a new variation. So inside ChatGPT, what I like to do is upload the reference image and ask what theme could fit this kind of layout. In this case, I asked for different topics that could be adapted from this layout. And funny enough, because I was speaking too fast, the microphone misunderstood me. So instead of writing another theme, it wrote another theme. But because ChatGPT had the context from previous conversation, it understood what I meant. It knew that I was talking about a new theme for the layout, not an actual theme. So after reading the suggestion, I decided to go with the sports performance direction. Then I asked for a color palette that would match that topic, plus a stronger font pairing. So I don't need a huge prompt, I just need a short, clear direction that could guide Neuform properly. So I copied the prompt, go back to Neuform, click remix with prompt, and just paste it. And this is the second iteration. Right away, it fixed the two broken images, adapted the text to the sports performance topic, and starting using the new color palette. So now the layout is no longer just a copy of the original reference. It has started to become its own direction. So at this point, the structure is there, the topic is there, and the visual direction is starting to make more sense, but it's still not final. So for the next modification, I want more control. So I can go into code mode, copy the code, or just download the HTML file and bring it back into ChatGPT. So the first thing I notice is that the font doesn't really match the feeling I want. For a sports performance layout, I want something stronger, something more bold, more energetic, or more high performance. And the current font feels a bit too basic. I also want to remove the rounded corners because they make the layout feel softer than I want. For this direction, sharper edges feel better, more athletic, more direct, more performance driven. So I just asked ChatGPT to update the code with a stronger font direction, remove the rounded corners, and clean up a few elements at the bottom. Then I just copied the updated code and pasted back into Neuform. Next, I noticed the headline. The message is good, but visually it's taking too many lines. I want it to feel more powerful and intentional. So I asked for the title to be split into two lines instead. Train harder and recover faster. And I want the second line to have more contrast so the message feel more dynamic. So ChatGPT gives me the code fix. I copy it and just replace that part again in Neuform. But when I preview it, the result is still not exactly what I wanted. The title is still breaking into too many lines. And this is a good example of something important. Sometimes the AI did what you asked, but the layout structure is preventing the result from showing properly. In this case, the problem is not the text. The problem is the width of the container. The headline container is too narrow, so even if the text is supposed to be on two lines, there isn't enough space for it. So I'll fix that in a moment. Before fixing the headline, I just want to replace the images. The current images are better than before, but some of them still feels too generic. So I just go into the design tab. This is one of the easiest way to make fast visual improvement. Neuform detects the images used in the UI, and you can click on each image and replace it with something that fits better. You can either choose from the built-in library, or if you already have your own image URL, you can just paste it directly at the top of the image preview. So I replaced the images with ones that feel more aligned with the sports performance direction. Already, the layout feels more intentional. Now back to the headline issue. The text container is too small. So technically, I could reduce the font size and force it to fit, but that would weaken the impact. For this kind of hero section, I want the headline to stay big. So instead of making the text smaller, I asked ChatGPT to make the whole layout more wider and increase the width of the hero title container. Then I just replaced the updated code, and now it works. The titles finally sits the way I wanted. Train harder on the first line and recover faster on the second line. Now the layout feels stronger, cleaner, and much closer to a final polished version. For the final touch, I want to add some motion. So using the remix with prompt feature, I use the mask reveal skill and ask it to animate the text. So now when the UI loads, the content appears with a nice reveal animation instead of just sitting there statically. So this is the first polished version of the UI. We started from a screenshot, recreated the layout, changed the theme, improved the typography, replaced the images, fixed the structure, adjust the headline, and added some animation. So this is already a complete transformation from the first iteration. But once you have a strong version, this is where Neuform becomes really interesting. From there, I can keep exploring variation without starting over. For example, I can simply type dark mode, and right away, Neuform creates a dark vision of the same direction. This is useful because sometimes the dark mode version actually feels stronger than the original. Then I also ask it to explore different layout variation. The first one was okay, but I didn't like it too much. It changed the structure, but it didn't feel better. So I asked for another layout exploration, and the second one had more potential. Everything was more centered, the composition felt cleaner, and it gave the design a different energy while still staying connected to the same concept. So I decided to work from that version. For the final variation, I added the mask reveal animation again. But this is another small thing to watch for. Even when you use the iterate button and the layout stays visually similar, the AI can sometimes change the text content. And that happened here. The layout was good, but some of the wording changed and I preferred the original headline. So I quickly fixed it in the code mode. I clicked on the text element, edited the title directly in the code, and changed it back to the version I wanted. And that's how I got the final version of this first UI. From one screenshot, we create a recreated foundation, change the theme, polish the design, fix the structure, add better imagery, animated the text, explored dark mode, tested layout variation, and manually corrected the final details. So that's the real workflow. It's not just one magic prompt. It's a process of building a strong foundation, judging what is worth keeping, improving the parts that matter, and then using remixing to explore better version faster. Now let's move on to the second UI. For this one, I found a more intriguing layout. But compared to the first example, this one is a bit more complex in the way the elements are placed. The composition has more overlapping areas, more image blocks, and more visual movement. So I was curious to see how Neuform would handle that kind of structure. So for this second example, I won't go as deep into every single detail like I did with the first UI. Instead, I'll go through the key step and show how I got from the original screenshot to the final polished result. First, I start the same way. I drag the screenshot into Neuform and ask it to recreate the layout as closely as possible. But this time I create two different generations. For the first one, I drag the image into the canvas, use a simple prompt like recreate this layout exactly, then I click iterate. For the second version, I use the same screenshot and the same prompt, but this time I use the remix button instead. I like doing this because it gives me multiple starting points. And when a layout is more complex, I don't want to commit too early to the first result. I'd rather generate 2 or 3 directions, compare them, and choose the one that has the strongest foundation. So this is the first version from the iterate button. It does have some resemblance to the original screenshot. The general structure is there and we can recognize the layout direction. But the image section is not as clean. The placement feels a bit messy, and I can already tell this might become annoying to fix later. That doesn't mean the version is bad, but when I compare it to the second generation, the remix version feels stronger. The image structure is cleaner, the layout feels more balanced, and overall, it gives me a better foundation to continue from. So for this one, I'm going to select the second one and keep working from the remix version. The next step is changing the theme. The original layout was about soccer, but I don't want to keep it in the same category. So again, I bring the screenshot into ChatGPT and ask for a new topic that could fit this kind of structure. So after exploring a few directions, I decided to turn it into a creator marketplace. That direction works well because the layout already has a lot of visual blocks, images, metrics, and community style energy. So I asked ChatGPT to give me a short but detailed prompt with a new theme, a new color palette, and a new font pairing. Then I copied the prompt, went back into Neuform, and used it to remix the layout. On the first theme iteration, the direction is already much better. The content has been adapted to the creator marketplace idea. The colors are starting to shift, and the layout is no longer tied to the original soccer reference. But the middle section where the images are placed feels too cramped. There isn't enough breathing room around the image container, especially at the top and bottom. So the next change is simple. I just add more spacing around that image section and give the whole composition a bit more room. And right away, the layout starts to feel much cleaner. The structure is still the same, but the spacing makes everything feel more intentional. From here, I'm already satisfied with the main layout. So now it's less about rebuilding and more about enhancement. The foundation is good, the topic works, the spacing is better. Now I just want to polish the details. The first thing I update is the matrix number. So I change them to feel more realistic for a creator marketplace. Then I replace the generic unsplash images with better visual that fits the new theme. And this makes a big difference. Once the images, metrics, and topic all match, the layout feels much more believable. It stops feeling like a remix of a sports layout and starts feeling like its own product concept. Then I look closely at the background. The layout already had this subtle dotted grid style, and I thought it could work really well with one of the skills from the skill library. So I went into the skill library and selected the animated theater background. Since this layout already had a kind of digital grid feeling, the animated theater background felt like a natural fit. I used Remix with prompts, selected the skill, and clicked iterate. That gave the design a bit more motion and made the background feel more alive without changing the whole structure. After that, I wanted the matrix to stand out more, so I added a stronger contrast color to the matrix number and animated them. This is a small detail, but it helps the layout feel more dynamic. Instead of the number just sitting there, they now feel like part of the experience. At this point, the UI was almost final. I could have stopped there, but I wanted to push it a little bit more further. So for the final enhancement, I tried adding a parallax effect to the group of images. Because this layout has a strong central image composition, a bit of depth makes it feel more premium. The goal was not to over-animate the page, it was just to add a subtle movement so the image cluster doesn't feel flat. And once that was added, the layout felt much more polished. Now we have better images, stronger matrix, animated numbers, and animated background and a subtle parallax effect. And after that, I also explore a few extra remix options. The first remix tested a new layout direction, but I didn't really like it. It changed the structure, but it didn't improve the design. The second one had a different vibe, but it didn't really fit the creator marketplace concept. And the third one had a nice style, but it was lacking color, so it didn't work as well for this UI. This is also part of the workflow. Not every remix needs to become the final version. Sometimes remixing is just a way to explore what could work, and just as importantly, what doesn't work. So this is the final version of the second UI. We started from a more complex screenshot, generated multiple foundation. And again, the key is not to expect the first result to be perfect. The key is to recognize which version has potential, then keep improving it step by step until the design feels complete. Now, for the third and final UI, I wanted to try something different. This one didn't start from a screenshot. Instead, I wanted to explore what happens when you start from a skill.md file from an external source. So while I was working inside Aura and exploring the skills page, I noticed there was a 3GS animation skill. It had been there for a while, but I never really tried it inside the platform. And if you scroll through the file, especially if you're not technical, it can look a bit intimidating. There's a lot of information about animation logic, movement, 3D scene, scroll behavior, and how different effects should be structured. So at first, I didn't really know how to use it. I could tell the file was useful, but I didn't know what kind of result I was supposed to create with it. So here you can see the author of the skill, and if you click on the author link, it brings you to his GitHub where you can download the skill.md file. So that's what I did. So I downloaded the file, brought it into ChatGPT, and simply asked, "Can you read the file?" That one question made everything much clearer, because instead of trying to understand the technical file myself, I used ChatGPT to explain what the skill actually does and how I could use it creatively. The easiest way to understand the skill.md file is this. It's not one fixed animation. is more like an animation guide for the AI. So instead of telling the AIs to always create the same effect, the file gives it a set of motion techniques it can reuse in different ways. So depending on your prompt, the same skill can help create a rotating globe, floating objects, scroll-based motion, animated product scenes, or interactive 3D hero section. So that's the main value. You don't need to fully understand the technical file yourself. You can upload it to ChatGPT and ask, can you explain what this skill does and give me a few landing page idea I can create with it. Then ChatGPT can translate the technical file into simple, creative direction. From there, you pick the idea you like, turn it into a prompt, and use it inside your builder. So for this third UI, instead of starting from a screenshot, I'm starting from the skill itself. The skill gives the AI stronger animation knowledge, and my prompt decides what kind of UI I want to create with it. So before we can start generating any UI with that skill, we first need to add it to the skill library. At the moment, Neuform doesn't let us create a brand new skill directly from the MD file. So for now, there's a simple workaround. First, go inside any UI you already generated. Then at the top right, click Show Right menu. Inside the Prompt tab, scroll all the way to the bottom, and there you'll find the option to turn to skill. Now here's the important part. Right now, we can upload a MD file or any text file directly. You can only paste text into the direction box. But even if you paste your skill.md content there, Neuform was originally designed to turn the existing style or animation of that UI into a skill. So in this case, if the current UI already has an animation or a background effect, Neuform will use that as the base and generate a skill from it. That means the text you paste in is not really enough by itself. The generated skill will still need to be edited afterward. So for now, I'm just using this as a workaround to create a skill entry. You can choose to make it private or public. For this example, I'm setting it to private. I just paste the full 3.js animation skill text as a placeholder and click Create Skill. Now, the new skill has been added to your private library. But if we open the full prompt, we can see that it has been adapted into Neuform's own skill format, and it doesn't fully match the original skill.md file yet. So the next step is simple. Click Edit Skill, then manually replace the generated prompt with the actual content you want. You can also update the name, the label, and the description. Then save the skill. And now, if we open View Prompt, we can see that the skill have been updated and now properly reflects the skill.md file we wanted to use. So now we're ready to test it. To generate ideas, I asked ChatGPT to read the skill and give me a few animation concepts I could create with it. It gave me 5 directions: a rotating globe hero, floating product card, a neural network protocol system, an animated GLB product object, and a scroll-driven 3D scene. So I copied those prompts one by one, went back to Neuform, pasted them in the prompt box, and made sure to select the newly created 3GS animation skill. You can also write something simple in the prompt like apply this skill. Then I repeated the same process for each example, just to see how the first generation will respond. And this part is important to keep in mind. These are all first iteration. Sometimes the first result already looks great. Sometimes it needs more refinement. The goal here is not to expect perfection right away. It's to explore quickly and see which direction has the most potential. So here was the first result for the floating card concept. This one was the neural protocol system. This one was the scroll-driven 3D scene. This one was the rotating globe. And finally, this one was the animated GLB object. So the robot concept was the one I wanted to keep exploring. For the UI shown in this demo, this was actually my first iteration. I did generate a few more variations after that, but visually, this one had the most potential. I like the idea of having the robot as the main animated object, but for a hero section, I still want everything to be visible at first glance. I don't want the user to have to scroll just to understand the hero. So that became the direction. Keep the main content visible immediately and place the robot on the right side of the hero section. From there, the first refinement was simple. I asked the AI to adapt the theme, the colors, and the font to something more futuristic. and the result already fit the robot concept much better. The overall direction felt more cohesive, and it started to feel like a proper futuristic landing page instead of just a technical animation demo. But then we had a new issue. The animated object was too large. So the next prompt was just to reduce the size of the robot and make the composition fit the hero section better. And after that, the UI was almost done. The robot was interactive, reacting to the mouse, and the layout was already looking much more polished. For the final refinement, I just wanted a bit more contrast. At first, everything was leaning too much into the same cyan accent color, so instead of keeping everything in one color family, I changed the robot to use another color. That gave the page a bit more depth and made the hero feel more visually balanced. And that became the final version of the third UI. So as you can see, working with Neuform is really a process of exploration. What I'm showing here is not a perfect blueprint where every step gives you the exact final result. It's more a real example of how you can start with an idea, test direction quickly, identify what has potential, and then keep refining it until the UI feels right. And that's really the bigger goal of this video. Not just to show a final design, but to show the actual process behind it. How you can go from inspiration, or even from a skill file, and turn that into a more polished and animated UI. So hopefully this gives you a clearer idea of how to start experimenting with your own workflows and how to push your UI from a static reference into something much more dynamic and refined.